Hello, this is the first section I'm reading of The Children of Green Knowe by Lucy N. Boston. Yuletide. A little boy was sitting in the corner of a railway carriage, looking out at the rain, which was splashing against the window and blotching downward in an ugly, dirty way. He was not the only person in the carriage, but the others were strangers to him. He was alone, as usual. There were two women opposite him, a fat one and a thin one, and they talked without stopping, smacking their lips in between sentences, and seemed to enjoy what they said as much as if it was something to eat. They were knitting all the time, and whenever the train stopped, the click-clack of their needles was loud and clear like two clocks. It was a stopping train, more stop than go, and it had been crawling along through flat, flooded country for a long time. Everywhere there was water. Not sea, or rivers, or lakes, but just senseless floodwater with the rain splashing into it. Sometimes the railway lines were covered by it, and then the train noise was quite different, softer than a boat. I wish it was the flood, thought the boy. Or that I was going to the Ark. That would be fun, like the circus. Perhaps Noah had a whip and made all the animals go round and round for exercise. What a noise there would be, with the lions roaring, elephants trumpeting, pigs squealing, donkeys braying, horses whinnying, bulls bellowing, and cocks and hens always thinking they were going to be trodden on, but unable to fly up onto the roof where all the other birds were singing, screaming, twittering and cooing. What must it have sounded like, coming along on the tide? And did Mrs. Knowe just knit and take no notice? The two women opposite him were getting ready for the next station. They packed up their knitting and collected their parcels, and then sat staring at the little boy. He had a thin face and very large eyes. He looked patient and rather sad. They seemed to notice him for the first time. "What's your name, son?" asked the fat woman suddenly. "I've never seen you on this train before." This was always a question he dreaded. Was he to say his unexpected real name, or his silly pet names? "Toseland," he said. "Toseland? It's a real old-fashioned name in these parts. There's Fen Toseland and Toseland Snagness and Toseland Gunnan. It's your Christian name." "That is it, Toseland." "Do your mum and dad live round here, son?" No, they live in Burma." "Fancy that now. That's a long way away. Where are you going then?" "I don't know. That is, I'm going to stay with my great-grandmother, old Knowe, at Green Knowe. The station is Penny Soaky." "That's the next station after this. We get out here. Don't forget the next station. Make sure there's some dry land before you get out the train. The floods are bad there. Bye-bye. Cheerio." They got out, shouting and joking with the porters and kissing the people who had come to meet them. They started off into the hissing rain as if they loved it. Toseland heard the fat woman's loud voice saying, "Oh, I don't mind this, I like it. It's our own rain, not like that dirty London water." The train jogged on again, and now Toseland was quite alone. He wished he had a family, like other people, brothers and sisters, even if his father were away. His mother was dead. He had a stepmother, but he hardly knew her, and was miserably shy of her. He had been at a boarding school, and for the last holidays he had been left behind to stay with the headmistress, Miss Spud, and her old father. They meant to be kind to him, but they never spoke to him without saying "dear." It was "finish up your porridge, dear," We don't want you to get thin, or put on your coat, dear. We don't want you to catch cold, or get ready for church, dear. We don't want you to grow up a heathen. And every day after breakfast, run along to your room, dear. We want to read the papers. But now his great-grandmother Oldknowe had written that he was to come and live with her. He had never seen her, but she was his own great-grandmother, and that was something. Of course, she would be very old. He thought of some old people he had seen who were so old that it frightened him. He wondered if she would be frighteningly old. He began to feel afraid already. And to shake it off, he thought about Green Knowe and Penny Soaky. Queer names. Green Knowe was pure mystery, but Penny Soaky was friendly, like a joke. Suddenly, the train stopped, and the porters were shouting, "Penny Soaky! Penny Soaky!" Toseland had no sooner got the door open than a man wearing a taxi driver's hat came along calling, "Anybody here for Green Knowe? Are you Master Toseland for Green Knowe?" "Oh yes, please, it's me." "This your luggage? 2 more in the van. You stand here out the rain while I get it." There were a few houses to be seen on one side of the line, and on the other nothing but flooded fields with hedges standing in the water. "Come along," said the taxi-man. "I put all your luggage in the car. It'll be dark before we get there, and we've got to go through a lot of water." "Is it deep?" "Not so deep, I hope, that we can't get through it." "If it rains for 40 days and 40 nights, will it be a real flood?" "Sure enough it would." Toseland sat by the driver, and they set off. The windscreen wipers made 2 clear fans on the windscreen, through which you could see the road half covered with water, with ditches brimming on either side. When they came near the bridge that crossed the river, the road disappeared under water altogether, and they seemed to drive into the side of the river with a great splash that flew up against the windows. But it was only a few inches deep, and then they reached the humpbacked bridge, and went up and over it, and down again into deeper water on the other side. This time they drove very carefully, like bathers walking out into cold water. The car crept along, making wide ripples. "We don't want to stick here," said the driver. "This car don't float." They came safely through that side too, and now the headlights were turned on, for it was growing dark and Toseland could see nothing but rain and drizzle. "Is it far?" he asked. "Not very, but we've got a long way to go around to get past the floods. Green Knowe stands almost in the middle of it now, because the river runs alongside the garden. Once you get there, you won't be able to get out again till the flood goes down." "How will I get in then?" "Can you swim?" "Yes. I did 20 strokes last summer. Would that be enough?" "You'd have to do better than that. Perhaps if you felt yourself sinking, you could manage a few more." "But it's quite dark. How will I know where to swim?" "The driver laughed. "Don't you worry, Mrs. Oldknowe will never let you drown. She'll see you get there all right. Now, here we are. At least I can't go any further." Toseland pushed the car door open and looked out. It had stopped raining. The car was standing in a lane of shallow water that stretched out into the dark in front and behind. The driver was wearing Wellington boots, and he got out and paddled round the car. Toseland was afraid that he would be left now to go on as best he could by himself. He did not like to show that he was afraid, so he tried another way of finding out. "If I am going to swim," he said, "what will you do with my luggage?" "You haven't got no gum boots, have you?" said the driver. "Come on, get on my shoulders and we'll have a look round to see if anyone's coming to meet you." Toesland climbed onto his shoulders and they set off, but almost at once they heard the sound of oars, and a lantern came round the corner of the lane, rocking on the bows of a rowing boat. A man called out, "Is that Master Toesland?" The driver shouted back, "Is that Mr. Bargus?" But Toesland was speechless with relief and delight. "Good evening, Master Toesland," said Mr. Bargus, holding up the lantern to look at him, while Toesland looked too and saw a nice old cherry-red face with bright blue eyes. "Pleased to meet you. I knew your mother when she was your size. I bet you were wondering how you were going to get home." It was nice to hear somebody talking about home in that way. Toesland felt much happier, and now he knew the driver had been teasing him, so he grinned and said, "I was going to swim." The boat was moored to somebody's garden gate, while the two men put the trunk and tuck box into it. "You'll be all right now," said the taxi man. "Good night to you both." "Good night, and thank you," said Toesland. Mr. Boggis handed him the lantern and told him to kneel up in the bows with it and shout if they were likely to bump into anything. They rowed round two corners in the road, and then in at a big white gate. Toesland waved the lantern about and saw trees and bushes standing in the water. Presently the boat was rocked by quite a strong current, and the reflection of the lantern streamed away in elastic jigsaw shapes and made gold rings around the tree trunks. At last they came to a still pool, reaching to the steps of the house, and the keel of the boat grated on gravel. The windows were all lit up, but it was too dark to see what kind of a house it was, only that it was high and narrow like a tower. "Come along in," said Mr. Boggis. "I'll show you in. I'd like to see Mrs. Old Knowe's face when she sees you." The entrance hall was a strange place. As they stepped in, a similar door opened at the far end of the house, and another man and boy entered there. Then Toesland saw that it was only themselves in a big mirror. The walls round him were partly rough stone and partly plaster, but hung all over with mirrors and pictures and china. There were 3 big old mirrors all reflecting each other, so that at first Toesland was puzzled to find what was real and which door one could go straight through, the way one wanted to, not sideways, somewhere else. He almost wondered which was really himself. There were vases everywhere filled with queer flowers, branches of dry winter twigs out of which little tassels and rosettes of flower petals were bursting, some yellow, some white, some purple. They had an exciting smell, almost like something to eat, and they looked as if they had been produced by magic. As if someone had said, "Abracadabra, let these sticks burst into flower." "What if my great-grandmother is a witch?" he thought. Above the vases, wherever there had been a beam or an odd corner or a doorpost out of which they could, as it were, grow, there were children carved in dark oak, leaning out over the flowers. Most of them had wings. One had a real bird's nest on its head, and all of them had such round, polished cheeks, they seemed to be laughing and welcoming him. While he was looking round him, Boggis had taken his coat and cap from him and hummed, "Your great-grandmother will be in here," he said, and led him to a little old stone doorway, such as you might find in a belfry. He knocked on the door. "Come in," said a clear voice. Boggis gave Toesland a shove, and he found himself inside. The room seemed to be the ground floor of a castle, much like the ruined castles that he had explored on school picnics. Only this was not a ruin. It looked as if it never possibly could be. Its thick stone walls were strong, and warm and lively. It was furnished with the comfortable, polished, old-fashioned themes, as though living in castles was quite ordinary. Toseland stood just inside the door and felt it must be a dream. His great-grandmother was sitting by a huge open fireplace where logs and peat were burning. The room smelled of woods and wood smoke. He forgot about her being frighteningly old. She had short silver curls, and her face had so many wrinkles. It looked as if someone had been trying to draw her for a very long time, and every line put in made the face more like her. She was wearing a soft dress of folded velvet that was as black as a hole in darkness. The room was full of candles and glass candlesticks, and there was candlelight in her room, and she held out her hand to him. "So, you've come back," she said, smiling, as he came forward, and he found himself leaning against her shoulder as if he knew her quite well. "Why do you say, come back?" he asked, not at all shy. "I wondered whose face it would be of all the faces I knew," she said. "They always come back. You are like another Toseland, your grandfather. What a good thing you have the right name, because I should always be calling you Tolly anyway. I used to call him Tolly. Have you got a pet name? I'm sure they don't call you Toseland at school." "No, I get called Towser." "And at home?" "My stepmother calls me Toto, but I hate it. It's worse than Towser." "I think I agree with you. Here we are all used to Toseland. It's the family name, and doesn't seem queer to us. So you shan't be Toto here. Do you mind Tolly?" "I like it. It's what my mother used to call me. What shall I call you?" "Granny," she said. "What does one generation more or less matter? I'm glad you have come. It will seem lovely to me. How many years of you have I wasted?" "7, said Tolly, watching the flames tugging loose from the logs and leaping up the black chimney. They reminded him of bonfire flames wrestling and tearing and whistling in the sky on the 5th of November. Those had been frightening, but these were wonderful. "Are these our flames?" he asked. I mean, are they our own?" "The blue ones are yours, and the orange ones are mine." "And the candle flames?" "All yours." Tolly hesitated, then asked in a very little voice, because he hardly dared, Is it my house? I mean, partly." "Of course it is. Partly, as you say. Well, now that you are here, what shall we do first? Are you hungry?" She rose and, standing, looked much older. Her figure was bent and shrunken, her face no higher than Tolly's own. The folds of her dress seemed both to weigh her down and to hold her up. She brought a tray that was laid ready for him on the sideboard, and put it on a low table in front of the fire. There were egg sandwiches and chicken sandwiches and iced orange cake and jelly and chocolate finger biscuits. Toseland ate happily and tried not to make puns. "I came in a boat with a lantern," he said. "I played the house was Noah's Ark." "Oh, the Ark. So you played it was the Ark." "Yes. Do you think Noah had a whip like a circus man and made the animals run round and round for exercise?" "Yes." and Ham juggled with clubs and plates to pass the time away, and Shem and Japhet were clowns and tried to make Mrs. Knowe laugh. But she never did, because if she had done, all her buttons would have burst off. She was done up very tight. At that moment the fire went pop and shot a piece of wood out into the room. Pop again. Buttons? Who said buttons? Poor Mrs. Knowe. Tolly chased the sparks and trod on them to put them out. Why do you live in a castle? He said, looking round. Why not? Castles were meant to live in. I thought that was only in fairy tales. Is it a real castle? Of course. I mean, do things happen in it like the castles in books? Oh, yes. Things happen in it. What sort of things? Wait and see. I am waiting too to see what happens now that you are here. Something will, I'm sure. Tomorrow you can explore the inside of the house, up and down, and learn your way about, and to feel at home in it, because you won't be able to go outside until the floods go down. And now you must come and see your own room, and you must go to bed early tonight. She led him up winding stairs and through a high arched room, like a knight's hall, that she called the music room, and up more stairs to the very top of the house. Here there was a room under the roof, with the ceiling the shape of the roof, and all the beams showing. It was a long room, with a triangle of wall at each end and no walls at the sides, because the sloping ceiling came down to the floor like a tent. There were windows on 3 sides, and a little low wooden bed in the middle covered with a patchwork quilt, as unlike a school bed as anything could be. There was a low table, a chest of drawers, and lots of smooth, polished, empty floor. At one side there was a beautiful old rocking horse, not a safety rocking horse hanging on iron swings from a centre shaft, but a horse whose legs were stretched to full gallop, fixed along rockers so that it could, if you rode it violently, both rear and kick. On the other side was a doll's house. By the bed was a wooden box painted vermilion with bright patterns all over it, and next to it all Tolly's luggage piled up, making the room look really his. A wicker birdcage hung from one of the beams. On the only side that had no window, there was hung a big mirror reflecting all the rest, the rafters, the wicker cage, the rocking horse, the doll's house, the painted box, the bed. Is this the house? Said Tolly. Everything is twice. He tried the lid of the painted box, but couldn't open it. The key is lost, said Mrs. Knowe. I don't know what's in it. It used to be the children's toy box. He put his hand on the rocking horse's mane, which was real horsehair. Its tail was real hair too, black and soft and long. He started it rocking. It made a nice creaky sound, like a rocking chair. He opened the front of the doll's house. Why, it's this house, he said. Look, here's the knight's hall, and here's the stairs, and here's my room, here's the rocking horse, and here's the red box, and here's the tiny bird cage. But it's got 4 beds in it. Are there sometimes other children here? Mrs. Knowe looked at him as if she would like to know everything about him before she answered. Yes, she said, sometimes. Who are they? You'll see when they come, if they come. When do they come? Oh, when they like. Now let's unpack. Here are your pyjamas. Is there anything you want to have in bed with you? Any books or photos that you put under your pillow? On the chest of drawers, Tommy had seen 2 curly white china dogs, an old clock, and an ebony mouse, life-sized with shiny black eyes. It was so cleverly carved that you could see every hair, and it felt like fur to stroke. As he pulled the sheets up to his nose, he said, "Can I have the mouse in bed?" Mrs. Oldknow smiled. "You want Toby's Japanese mouse?" "Here it is." "Who's Toby?" "Oh, well, really another Toesland. Toby for short. Now sleep well. I'll light the night light for you." "Oh, the clock's not going." She picked up the old clock, which had a sun and moon painted on its face, and started it ticking. It had a very slow tick-tock, comforting and simple. "There," she said. "Now, good night. My room is underneath yours. You can knock on the floor if you want to." She went away, and Tolly lay happily looking at the surprising shadows made by the little night light. The beams, the big shadow of the rocking horse, the low one of the doll's house on the floor, the elongated criss-crossings of the bird cage on the ceiling. The mirror repeated it all in the opposite direction, distant and slightly tilted. How could such a little light do it all? Never in his life had he lain in such a room, yet it did not feel strange. He felt with all his heart that he was at home. He held the mouse in his hand under the pillow, and soon fell asleep. He slept long and well. In his dreams he was swimming towards the house in the dark when he heard the creak of oars coming to meet him. He tried to shout, but it was too difficult to do while swimming. In the effort he woke up. The funny thing was that lying there with his eyes closed he could still hear the creak, croak. No, it couldn't be oars. It must be the rocking horse. He sat up in bed, and it seemed to him that the horse had just that minute stopped rocking. The only sound he could hear now was the slow tick-tock of the old clock. The room was in dim half-light because the curtains were still drawn. Tolly jumped out of bed. First he put his precious mouse back between the 2 china dogs. Then he went to the rocking horse just to stroke its real silky mane and to pretend to see if it was out of breath. Then he ran to the window and knelt on the window seat behind the curtains to look out at the view he had not yet seen. When, just at that moment, Mrs. Oldknowe came into the room, all she could see of him were the soles of his pink feet. As she pulled back the curtains, he turned a happy, excited face to her. Oh, look, he said. It was a brilliant sunny morning, and all the view was sparkling blue water, right away to the low hills in the distance. From this high window he could see where the course of the river should be, because of the pollard willows sticking out on each side of the bank, and because there the water was whirlpooled and creased and very brown and swift, while all the miles of overflow were just like blue soap. "It really is like being in the Ark," said Tolly. "Yes, all the children used to call it the Ark. Your grandfather did, and he learned it from his father, who learned it from his, and so on right away back. But you called it that by yourself." Tolly sat in his pyjamas on the rocking horse, making it go creak, Croak, creak, croak. Do you know, he said, when I was lying in bed with my eyes shut, I could hear the horse go creak, croak, just like this. But when I opened my eyes, it was quite still. And did the mouse squeak under your pillow? And did the china dogs bark? No, said Tolly. Do they? Mrs. Old Knowe laughed. You seem to be ready for anything. That's something, she said. Now, get dressed and come down to breakfast.